Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne. And I think it happens to all of us artists that sometimes when you sit down to draw what you have in your head, which is so dynamic and exciting and full of life, you actually realize that once you apply pen to paper or stylus to tablet, as the case may be, that your final product doesn't look anything like what you had in your head. It's much more stiff and cardboard cutouty and just generally not giving off the atmosphere, the energy and the emotions that you want it to. So I wanted to make a little do this, not that, about how to add more energy and life to your drawing. So on the don't side, which I have colored a light red, I'm just doing a drawing, basically not implementing the things that I've learned. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with this style of drawing. I still think she's really cute, but this is just sort of encapsulating all of the habits that I had for a long time that I feel like made my art a little bit less expressive. And since I'm someone who loves expressive art, and I really want it to be expressive, that's not really what I was going for. So I thought that I would just sort of show this, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you guys too. Again, as always with these do this, not that videos, it's not literal. It's not like I'm telling you you're not allowed to do these things. This is just stuff that, I changed and it helped me in my art journey, and I thought I might share it with you. So one of the key things that I find with this don't side that I don't really is the way that her face isn't really giving us much. It's really hard to tell what she's feeling other than her smile. Every other part of her pose and her face isn't really conveying that happy energy. There's actually not a lot of energy in it at all. Her pose, it's a bust shot. A lot of people draw those very frequently, and so I wanted to start with that. But her arms are just kind of down by her sides. It's not really giving us anything. And her eyebrows are obscured by her bangs. Now, this is a wildly controversial sort of position. I know a lot of people hate when you can see the eyebrows through the bangs, but I have found that if you're feeling like your characters aren't expressive or lively enough, this is something that changes everything when you can actually see the eyebrows no matter what hairstyle they're in. And I would argue that it's not as unrealistic as you think. I've seen a lot of people complaining about eyebrows that sort of stuck onto the top of the hair. It's like this annoying anime thing, but truthfully, when you see hair in real life, there are a million tiny little strands, so you actually are seeing the eyebrows sort of through these zillions of little gaps. When you're drawing a cartoon, the hair is completely opaque, right? But that's already sort of like a change that you're making in the style, so you might as well bring the eyebrows forward so that you can actually see how they're adjusting the facial expression, because it's not realistic either way. And frankly, I do think that it cuts a lot off when you can't see the eyebrows. I also, of course, with expressions, encourage you guys to think about how a big change, like a big smile, changes other parts of the facial expression, the facial structure. The most obvious sort of example of this is when you smile, your eyes crinkle up. It's actually a good way to tell if someone's smiling for real, because if their eyes aren't smiling with their mouth, you know that they're, kind of uncomfortable or something like that. And that can be a great way to show a different kind of expression on your character too. On the do side, one of the first things that I did is I brought her hand up as well as her shoulders so that the body, even though this is a bust shot, her body is still sort of being involved and adding to the overall emotion of the piece and sort of supporting her facial expression. The other thing that I really wanted to do was twist her. Basically, I moved her body one direction and her eyes the other, so that there's a little bit more dynamic sort of where your eye kind of goes. It just feels like the character is actually looking at something, not directly into the eyes of the viewer, but off at someone in the distance, and she's reacting to something. It just puts her more in her world, and I find that actually allows people to get more immersed in your drawing, if that makes sense. Another thing that I think makes a huge difference with making our characters feel more alive is just putting a little more detail into the clothes and the hair. Hair is very complicated. There's a lot of different ways to simplify it, and how much detail you put in is completely up to you. But I do find that if I put a little movement in the hair and little gaps in the hair where you can kind of see the background through and create these little segments of negative space sort of scattered around, it really adds a lot to the drawing, and it just makes her look more interesting to look at. There's just more to see, I guess. Adding things like accessories like the scrunchie holding her hair back, as well as more specific clothing items, can really help with making your characters feel distinct and alive rather than just lines on a page. It's one of those things that if you're not really into fashion or, you know, clothes in general, it feels like kind of a pain, but trust me, it's really worth it. So if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you, I highly recommend like looking into some fashion YouTubers or fashion blogs or, you know, whatever, like street snaps, whatever you're into, whatever you can get excited about, definitely take a look and just fill up your visual library with stuff like that. I also did a little short about how I've changed the way that I've drawn mouths now to make them look more 3D, and honestly just adding in a little bit more detail in the mouth, showing more of the tongue and the teeth, makes such a difference in how your character looks and how distinct they can look, as well as how much they can emote. Now let's say that all of that is easy for you. You already do bust shots and expressions really well, but you still feel like your art is kind of lifeless. It's possible that the problem is actually your posing. Now, one of the worst habits that I did for the longest time is building a body from the head down, or even the torso down. I was guilty of that for a long time. And again, like I say guilty, I think it held me back personally. There's nothing wrong with it inherently, but one of the things that happened to me when I was doing it in this style, in this order, is the head and the shoulders would always be too big and the body would kind of taper down smaller and smaller so that it fit properly on the page, as well as like doing this sort of like circle and then arm segment and then circle and then arm segment and then circle and then thigh segment, that whole thing. That it kind of looks like one of those like cheap drawing wooden posing dolls. It makes your characters look so stiff, I feel like. It's really not allowing you to think about the limbs in a way where they're like in 3D space. It like kind of forces you to think about them in kind of a flat way, or at least it did for me. And it just makes like your body is a lot more flexible than this style of construction really gives it credit for. And so I don't do this at all anymore. The head to feet kind of scaling issue reminds me of when you're trying to do like bubble letters on like a sign or something, and you like start with the first letter and the first letter is like way too big, but you don't realize until you're halfway through the word, and then it just gets smaller and more crunched together. It's kind of like that, but with the, you know, the feet being crunched together and looking just kind of off. And I also find that like when you draw the arms before you draw the hips get kind of smashed between them. So what I recommend instead is building kind of up from the feet, like figuring out where your character is standing, doing a super rough sort of gesture for where the feet are going to be, and then you do a line up where the weight is going to go. So obviously your character, if they're in, you know, normal gravity, they're going to be resting their weight on their feet. And so their body needs to be supported from between their 2 feet. That's where like most of their weight should probably be sitting around. I also think it's much more lifelike and interesting and dynamic if you push forward either the hips or push forward the chest or the head. There's a lot of ways that people can stand, like head forward posture, hip forward posture, but usually something is forward. Usually people aren't like military, like perfectly straight, all stacked on top of each other. And I find that even exaggerating this curve can make characters look extra interesting and definitely more relaxed. It just seems very unrelaxed when they're perfectly straight up and down like that. My favorite thing is to do sort of hip forward. I just find that like popping the hip out just lends a very casual and interesting curve to the whole drawing. Again, just like I did with the headshot, I turned it a little bit. I think that drawings are just generally, unless you're trying to do something with like some interesting symmetry, I think they're generally more interesting and lifelike looking when there's a little bit of a turn to it. It's very rare that you see things 100% head on. Usually you're seeing everything from a slight angle, physical, so I think that might be why like subconsciously we like that better. Again, I really think that like putting in just a little bit more effort into the clothes can make your character look more distinct and real. Making sure that the fabric feels like it actually has a weight and a texture to it and it's interacting with the body, as well as making sure that like if they have long hair, that it's interacting and intersecting with their shoulders, and you know, it just gives the sense that everything really exists. It really is in you know, this real physical plane with the other elements. I also highly recommend giving your characters an activity to do. Give them something other than just posing, unless they're like canonically a model or something. I think that it is so great to have them actually like reading a book, looking at their phone, you know, doing some kind of activity, even if they're, you know, your initial drawing idea was just to have them standing there. Just giving them something to do, especially if they're, you know, the type of character that doesn't just stand perfectly still and do nothing for long periods of time. It makes more sense for them to have something to look at and something to interact with. It's really common to feel like when you're drawing a character like this that you just really want to make people notice the character design, and you're not really thinking about how your character would feel standing there. But I think that the key to making them feel like a real person and a real character is by thinking about, like some kind of story for them. You know, it doesn't have to be like a full sort of epic. It just has to be the story of like, what are they doing right now? How do they feel right now? Where are they right now? Answering those questions can make all the difference. Speaking of where are they right now, this is my last sort of big tip about this. I really think recently that if you want to do an illustration that's going to feel lively and interesting and have people looking at it for any significant amount of time, it's really key to actually put them in some kind of environment. It's the best way to build up mood and atmosphere, and especially if you're going to be doing a character by themselves who isn't interacting with another character, actually giving them a real location to be, and adding in like foreground, midground, and background elements can really make the whole illustration feel much more alive. I mean, I guess it goes without saying that like we are always in an environment, so giving your character an environment just makes the whole thing feel that much more solid and fully realized. It feels less like preparation. Like a lot of character designs are really preparation for something else. It makes it feel less like a character design and more like a full-on illustration, and I find that, I don't know, I'm more happy with my art when I'm actually like finishing the backgrounds, even though backgrounds are kind of a pain, I'm not gonna lie. Giving them something to hold, giving them something to feel, and giving them somewhere to be can make all the difference. Honestly, a few months before I made this video, I was really struggling with this whole concept. It's a lot more obscure and harder to pin down than the more basic skills like composition and coloring and anatomy. Not that those things aren't difficult, but they're definitely easier to understand when you're chasing them. You understand what you want it to look like. Whereas this very concept of like an art piece feeling substantial and real and having real like atmosphere and getting across the kind of energy and expression that you really want, it's so much more nebulous. It's so much harder to pin down, especially if you have a relatively cartoony style, and you have to do a lot of your own sort of adjusting, even when you use references and whatnot. It was something that I spent a ton of time talking about, and I know that these tips might feel kind of disjointed, but they all are in the service of the same thing. It's a way to take your art from feeling kind of posed, kind of stiff, kind of like it's mostly just there to serve you, and getting it to a place where like it's a complete illustration. It feels full, it feels rich, your characters feel like they're really existing somewhere, that the illustration is a little peek into another world and not just, you know, a character standing there staring straight out at you, the viewer. I think that this is such an important skill, and it's something that helped me get my love of drawing back, because I was honestly so frustrated with my own work. I was so dissatisfied with it, which again, it's a really common thing. I go through it all the time. I don't like to make a big deal about it or talk about it too much, because it's really, I mean, I think it's annoying if even one of you guys look up to me. I think it's really annoying to hear people who you look up to complaining about their art, saying it's bad. You know, I've had artists who I really look up to really like being super self-deprecating and super down on their art, and it just makes you feel really bad. So I don't like to talk about it a lot, but trust me, like it's something that every artist goes through regularly, and it's usually something that happens right before you make a big breakthrough and improve your art a lot. So that's what I feel like happened with me, and that's why I wanted to make this do this not that video, because every time I discover something new that really helps me out, I want to share it with you guys. It's basically a compulsion at this point. So if you got anything out of this video, I really hope yeah, I hope that it's helpful for you. I just want your art journey to be easier, and yeah. So the other thing, back onto the main topic, the other thing that can really improve the sense of place in your illustrations and make them feel sort of depthier is to use like foreground elements in front of your characters. I find that little trick, just doing something like putting these leaves above the character, it just really makes the whole thing feel more 3D and pretty cheaply. You know, it's sometimes really hard to include perspective and really get a sense of like super realistic sense of space, but you know, just throwing in at least 3 levels, like foreground, midground, background, that can really make your illustration feel more complete as well. And it allows you to do cool stuff like I did with this shadow sort of being cast over her eye and her arm. Again, these are just more things to make your character feel more securely pinned down into this illustration, and it makes them feel like they're really in some kind of space. I feel like it's really easy to get so caught up in just drawing figures all the time and drawing character designs all the time where they're kind of just in a nebulous space or a quick colored background with like no real detail in it, but that started to feel more like just character design to me, which is really, it's a preparatory stage. It's not supposed to be the final result. So anyway, that was my meandering thoughts about how to make your art more lively and complete feeling and more exciting and more emotional. I hope that this is helpful to you guys, and please let me know if you have anything you'd like me to cover in this style in the future. And I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much to my beautiful patrons, including Tom the Chicken, Odds Jamal, Kayla Grimes, Rodrigo, Neurocherry, Cully Halsey, Kubo, Moonmilk, Alana the Artist, Rylan Parker, Raylan, Kadaria, Something Super, Deadly Nightshade Art, Maria Vasquez, Astral Fox Art, Middle Z, Lily Allure, The Expressive Poker Face, Morrissey Axolotl, Chris Draws, Kai Kizer, Subaki, Liliana Hummintree, Michael Lavalley, Cutie Pie, Rainwater Pearls, Ice Cream Pal, Lion, Nora Cornelison, Cola, Your Boy ST, JJ Jade, and of course, La Blah Blah Blah.